Welcome to Our Yurtiful Life podcast. In today's episode, we will be discussing some of the steps that go into starting a homestead.
Hey there, Yurties.
Thanks for joining us today. For anyone new here, I'm Keegan.
And I'm Sarah. We've been living a minimal off-grid lifestyle for over 10 years now.
We have a large family and lots of experiences to share.
So let's get to it. Welcome to Our Yurtiful Life. So today we're going to be talking about starting a homestead, and this is something we have done several times now.
Yep.
We've gotten some good practice, and I think we should start with the very basic of why. Why do you want to start a homestead?
So this is a very important step to start with. And it's most important because it's going to form the type of homestead you're looking to start, what that means to you, and what is your purpose. You need to know what your purpose is, what is driving you to try to homestead, and because that will define what you want to get out of your homestead.
So this is more than just the property or the animals, but the why is important because it will be your foundation for when you feel like giving up hope. And our homestead's name is Firm Foundations of Hope, or Firm Foundations Homestead. And that's something that's big to us. And so it's always good to have a why when you're going through the drudges of homesteading, and there will be downs and disappointments and failures. And when you get to those times and you feel so discouraged, having a why is very important, and it keeps you going.
It'll help to push you through. It's probably a good idea to actually write your why down so it doesn't change or morph in your head over time. And you can remind yourself and go back during those troubled times.
So one of our reasons why we wanted to homestead was to create a life that would let us live closer to creation and to the way things used to be, and also to provide a better life for our children.
And for me, self-sufficiency was an important aspect of homesteading. The homesteading is a step towards being a more self-sufficient family and not being so dependent on outside energy sources or food sources, supply chains that are all too susceptible to issues. So identifying your purpose and what you are looking to get out of your homestead is important.
And then the very next step that when you start a homestead you need to do is to formulate your plan. And there's two general areas that you're going to be planning when it comes to homesteading. And those tend to be your animals and your gardening. So let's start with animals because that's a huge one that a lot of people have questions about, or they want to know more about. When you get into homesteading, you equate homesteads with animals. And we will go into further detail in a future episode with more about choosing the right animals and all of that. But let's just start with the big picture. When you're making your homesteading plan and you have animals, what is your big goal of what you want for animals?
Right. So this big goal is important because this will, again, shape what kind of homestead you have. A homestead is not the same thing for everyone. I think ultimately it's a mixture of raising animals and raising food on your property for your own sustainment, not for commercial selling, is the general definition of what a homestead would be. But the way you go about doing that will be very different depending on your needs, your land's abilities, what it can offer you, what you can do with it.
So looking at the property you have and where you're at might define your goals for animals. Is it a place where you can only have smaller critters, or is it a place where you have acreage for large animals, cows, horses, all of those things? You have to know what you want to get into as your long-term goal, and then what are the small steps to work towards those goals. If your goal is to have 100 cows and you've never raised any before, your smaller step towards that goal might be, well, besides learning about cattle, maybe raising one, either a beef cow for a summer or raising a heifer and learning what it takes to start small. Also, you need to figure out If you want to have chickens and be raising all of your meat, that's a great goal to have. Raise all of your chickens for a year, but starting small. Maybe you start with a layer flock, or maybe you start with just a few chickens, one batch of 12 chickens, and you raise them and butcher them, and you go through that process, and you next year, okay, let's scale up and let's get a little bigger. Always try to start smaller and work your way up. And I know that to some people who followed our journey when we were on YouTube and things, it maybe seemed like we jumped in a lot with having animals right away or things like that. But I also had years of experience with sheep and goats and things like that. So that education and knowledge I brought with me, I wasn't starting fresh with no context or no idea of what I was getting into. And so it's very important to educate yourself, start small with something you can manage, and then grow from there.
So what you start with is never going to be the way it stays. So it's better to start small and not a year later be like, I can't do this, is overwhelming, and just abandon it altogether. It's better to start small enough that you're like, wow, this is manageable. I figured out some issues. I worked through it. Well, now I want more from it so I can add more and know what I can handle.
So with animals, have a goal in mind, start small and work towards that larger goal. And there's 4 general things with regards to animals that we would tell people. Number 1 is fencing.
Fencing's very important for animals. Keeping animals, good fencing makes for good animals, is how I see it. So before you get the animal that you want to get, I'm going to speak from our direction. Our direction has been smaller animals. We don't do well with cattle. We haven't had land that can offer that or hold a lot of cattle. So we've gone the direction of goats and sheep, which can be more manageable. So good fencing for them has been 4 foot high, minimum of 4 feet high, and I tend to use 2 inch by 4 inch welded wire because it's cheaper and more affordable than woven, and it still does the job when it's stretched right on T-posts. So I do T-post fencing.
And we found this fencing is very versatile for ducks and chickens as well. But it also, you could also use field fencing for sheep and goats or 4x4 fencing. Really, with fencing, you need to find out what can you afford. And I would recommend fencing in as much property as possible when you are trying to do your pastures, which would give yourself room for expansion. If you start with sheep and you have, or goats, and you have male and females, you're going to have babies. So you need to have that in mind when you start your fencing and you're planning for your fencing. Are you going to do paddocks? Are you going to do pasture rotation? All of these things are good things to bear in mind. Electric is also a good option for some people if you can do a solar generated electric or if you have it hooked onto the grid. But again, these are all considerations you need to take into account when you are planning your homestead. And I would recommend you always make a plan before putting anything into action. So plan for fencing, and then next, plan for shelter.
Yep, so those same animals they'll need a spot to be fenced in, but they'll need a shelter, especially come winter time, in order to survive or to thrive during those times.
And don't buy into the idea that the shelter has to be perfect. It has to be your picture perfect barn or things like that. Shelter can take many forms. And I think we'll do a podcast going into fencing and shelter in a later date where we go into more the creative ideas behind shelter and fencing and how to make do with less. But just have that in mind. You do need to provide shelter for your animals, but that the shelter can take a large variety of creative forms. It does not have to be the picture perfect ideal shed or barn for your animal to be comfortable and survive.
The big thing the shelter needs to accomplish is keep creating a dry spot so the animal can stay dry and no drafts or lack of wind drafts on windy days. As long as the animal is given a dry and non-windy spot, their fur or their wool will take care of the warmth usually with them together. They can take care of that part. They just need to be offered a dry spot with lack of drafts and they'll stay warm enough.
And again, use your creativity. Shelter can take many different forms. Another important aspect with animals when you're planning for a homestead is feed and water. What are you going to be feeding them? Where are you going to be sourcing your water from? Is it something that they need water hauled during winter months? Is it something you have a year round water source, such as a pond or a stream? And as far as feed, what type of feed? Are you going to do commercial feed? Are you doing organic feed? What are your local feed sources? What are the feed requirements for the animals that you're choosing? What does your budget look like to provide feed? Or are you going to be able to fully feed off of the land yourself? These are all things that while you're planning for your homestead, and it sounds great, to have a lot of animals or to raise animals for meat, these are questions that you should be asking yourself and making a plan and writing down. And if you have a spouse or a partner who's doing this with you, work together to come up with answers and solutions for these questions.
And the last main point we have for here is sickness or loss. This one is going to be hard to gauge if you've never raised animals for food or farm type animals for homesteading. You're not going to be able to know exactly how to deal with this until you come up to it, but you should at least have the mindset to expect loss. Don't expect that all of the animals you start with will survive and be perfectly fine and everything. You should expect to have some loss and try to be ready to what are you going to do with that animal? Once you have a body in the field you got to take care of. They couldn't survive a colder winter night or whatever happened. They got sick, got old age. How are you going to dispose of that body or resource the body? What is your system in place to take care of that?
So, this is a big point that a lot of people who start homesteading aren't prepared for. You have it in your mind that it could happen, but it probably won't happen to me. But when you have an animal that's sick, are you going to be able, do you have the resources of a vet? Is that a resource you're going to choose to use? Is that something you can afford? Are you going to be treating things yourself? These are all things you really have to look at and think about. And like Keegan said, if there is a death on the homestead, unexpected or planned, how are you going to deal with the body? How are you going to dispose of it? Is it something you can turn into food for other animals? Is it something that you have to bury? Like, these are all questions that you should have a plan and a mindset for and be ready for. And what if you have an animal that needs to be put down? If you can't do that yourself or don't want to, do you have someone else who's able to do that for you? These are, again, questions to ask, things to think about when you're planning to start your own homestead.
You need to make sure you do run through this last one, sickness and loss. At least try to give a rough plan. What would I do if this happens? If A happens, how do I respond? Because if you have something in place, it'll make it a lot easier to deal with that in the moment rather than scrambling and trying to figure it out because it wasn't thought of ahead of time. So now the next big thing that Sarah already mentioned is a garden.
So, with gardening, we have had many gardens over the years, varying states of success, and we have learned a lot over the last decade of homesteading. And there are really six, I call them the six S's of gardening. And the very first S is size. You need to, when you're very first starting out with a garden, think about the size. I recommend to keep it small at first and always have room to grow. But when you are homesteading, are you homesteading from an apartment, a balcony? What room do you have to garden and grow things? And taking that into account, do you have acres and acres and a big fields, pasture that you can make a large garden? For us, when we started Firm Foundation Homestead, I could envision right away where the garden would be. And we started with just 6 garden beds. And it may seem like it was small to most people, but my goal by having 6 beds was I could weed 1 bed a day and I could have 1 day off.
What was the size of roughly each of those beds then?
Each size is about 4 by 4. So we had 6 4 by 4 garden beds the first year we started this homestead. The next year we added 6 more beds that were much larger. I think they're approximately 2 to 3 feet wide and about 10 feet long. And now it's about been our third year having this property. And I think we have about 15 garden beds right now, that some are larger, some are smaller, and it's a mixture of perennial beds and annual beds. And we have plans to expand next year as well. But really, what it has been is, here's our start. If we can only manage this small 6 beds, that's all we can do. And then slowly, the next year, let's add a few more beds. And okay, we've managed all of this. This is working. Now we want to add these beds to it.
Mhm.
We knew what our goal is in the garden, but we're starting small and we've slowly been growing year by year as we can.
So again, everyone's land is going to be different in your climate and what you can and can't grow or do. So it may be wise if you really don't know and you don't have prior garden experience or you don't know what grows in your area. Advice is the first thing. Ask other people you know who are already gardening. Maybe they even have certain seeds they'd be willing to give you for varieties that are better at growing in your region or climate. That would be a great jump start. Kind of goes into heirloom variety of seeds. But also maybe just start with one bed, just one that you know you can definitely manage one, or you feel you can, and so put a variety of seeds within that bed, see what grows and what doesn't, what thrives and what doesn't. And then you could expand upon that.
Well, you're starting to jump into the other two more of the S's.
Oops.
That would be style, is another S, a style of garden. Are you doing raised beds, back to Eden gardening, conventional beds that are in the ground? What's going to work for you? Container planting? There are so many different styles of garden beds. And so, again, taking into account where you have, what size you have, and that will influence the style. And for our garden, we currently have a mixture of raised beds with a back to Eden method. So we're using wood chips in the garden, adding fertilizer every year to the garden to build the soil as well, but keeping the weeds minimized with wood chips and a back to Eden method. But we also have slightly raised beds. They're about 6 inches off the ground. So it's not too deep, but it's a little bit nicer on your back when you're kneeling in the garden and working.
Also, it allowed us to create the soil we wanted. We were building on top of a hilly, just grass, just hilly
And gravel. Maine is
grass and gravel. So there was nothing to dig down into. So we were just building up on top of that. So putting cardboard down and then just using nominal lumber to 2x8s. So it came out to around 6.5 inches or so. Just right on the ground there, screwed together on top of the cardboard, and then filling that with topsoil,
compost first, compost,
compost,
and then some
and then
topsoil. And
finishing off with some wood chipping, arborist wood chips the best we could, and then wood chipping heavily in the paths between the beds to help suppress the weeds, which has worked really well. Just wood chipping there a good quite a few inches, and we just need to keep adding wood chips to that.
so the main soil type on this property is very rocky and gravelly, and it is not great gardening soil. So we are having to build up the soil to be what we want it to be. So we knew the back to Eden method would really work well for that. And so then another S that we've talked about briefly were seeds. What type of seeds are you going to use? Are you going to use heirloom seeds, non GMO? What varieties of seeds are you going to plant? What do you like? What do you know how to raise? And what grows well in your area?
I personally recommend to help take some of the heartache out of it for you. Start with heirlooms or some kind of heirloom variety, that has grown well for generations within your area. There's probably a certain variety of each kind of plant you want to grow that grows well in your region. There's no reason, unless you have a very specific purpose, to really try to get out of that. If you're looking for self-sustainment, you probably should stick with whatever the pioneers and generations have used in your area.
Now, that being said, I get that it's really fun to experiment with different varieties, different items and seeds and things. So maybe allow yourself one fun seed to try every year, but don't make that the majority. If you're really looking for sustainability and productivity in your garden, try to stick with well-known things that you're going to use, you're going to eat. Our family, we love beans, we love garlic, we love potatoes, and those tend to do really well in our garden, as well as squash, summer squashes and zucchinis, tomatoes. So those are things that we heavily focus on in our garden. However, we also like to try new things. So this year I tried broccoli. It didn't work and grow well for us. I also have was given a Brussels sprout plant. And yeah, it's doing okay, but it's not thriving. We love Brussels sprouts, but it's not thriving in the garden the way I'd like. So these are things to take into consideration. Am I going to take up space next year planting these things? Probably not. If it doesn't thrive, it's not worth my time and effort of planting it. So a lot of gardening is trial and error, but it's things that you can learn from people around you who are gardeners as well, if you have that as a resource.
So we've covered size, style, and seeds so far. So what's the fourth one, Sarah?
All right, the next S is saturation. And this specifically regarding to your water saturation. What is your water sources available? Are you on city water? Do you have well water? Are you doing rain catchment? There are so many different styles of water sources, and you need to know what are your water requirements for your area.
So water is really important, and I think overlooked a lot of times. If you've grown up in the city or without a homesteading mindset or experience, you're probably not going to think of water as more than just a utility bill, something you pay for and you have and you drink and you cook with. Once you start adding animals and plants that you're purposely trying to grow, they need a lot of water too, and that kind of water can heavily affect them, whether it's well water or city water. And also, you're doing a much heavier usage of your water. If your well water, can your well keep up with that? Is it deep enough? And maybe you had no problem, you never thought about it, but once you start pumping out gallons of water every day, especially in the middle of summer, are you going to start running into water issues? So this is a consideration you really need to think of ahead of time, and know that your water source is dependable, or if possible, multiple water sources.
And the next S that we're going to talk about real quick is sunlight. We need sunlight to grow things. And so looking at what do you have for sunlight? Some of the properties we have been at have more sunlight than others. And when you're planning for your garden, you want an area that is fairly sunny, has good sunlight, but also take into account shade and cold tolerating plants. And our current property and homestead doesn't have like the best sunny spot for gardening. There is no like wonderfully sunny garden area. So we took that into account planning, and we used the sunniest possible spot, but it still gets shade a good part of the day. So that means some of our sun loving vegetables and plants are not going to do as well, and we have to modify them. If something is very sun and heat loving, we might not be able to grow it as well in our garden at our current location. And that's just something we're planning and taking into account, but something to definitely think about.
Yep.
What sun do you have? And then the last S would be soil. And what are your soil types? We mentioned briefly our soil is very rocky. It's mainly just gravelly, not very rich planting soil. So we have to build up the soil where we're living. And what type of soil do you have? Can you plant directly in the ground? Can you use topsoil from your area? Or do you have to build up your soil as well?
And something that might sound funny, but just want to mention it. Just because weeds are growing doesn't mean a garden's going to grow there.
That is true.
Weeds will grow anywhere. It doesn't matter the soil. So don't use weeds as a temperature test, if you will, of whether that's a good fertile soil.
So let's just quick review the 6 S's of planting a garden. Look at the size, the style, the water saturation, soil, sun, and your seeds, what you have to grow.
So now we're going to go to our third point is learning. Self-education. We touched on this a little bit in our first podcast. I said that self-education was very important and going to be a heavy part of getting into homestead and this kind of lifestyle.
And so when you're starting a homestead, you have to come from a place of wanting and willing to learn. And with self education, there is so much out there. You're doing it right now. This is a podcast. It's meant to encourage and inspire and bring hope to you and to educate you with expanding your thinking and the way of doing things. But there are other methods besides podcasts. You probably have a local library. There's YouTube. There are blogs you can read, books. There is such a vast knowledge base out there for anyone who is willing to learn and self-educate.
We live in a time where self-education, I think, is at its peak personally, with the availability of the internet and masses of knowledge and information with easy access, and books being a plethora and easy to access and cheap. This is the time where if you're wanting to self-educate, the things are there and accessible for free or very minor cost.
But we also can't discredit the benefit of classes. You might have local farmers or homesteaders in your area who are willing to teach you, willing to mentor, to give classes. Where we are located, there are a lot of resources actually as far as adult education classes in the community where you can learn certain skills, whether it be beekeeping or syrup making or basket weaving, all of these different skills available in adult education classes. That's another way to self-improve. Really, you just need to get out into your community, find people who are like-minded or doing similar things, and then see what resources are available for education. If you are a learner who's not self-motivated and self-teaching, then find someone who is willing to help teach you.
Okay, so learning is going to be a very important part of your journey. And next is taking a step. So we've talked about all the things leading up to actually doing. This is all the planning. Now into the doing.
So once you have formulated your plan, you have learned what you need to get that foundation. You need to take a step. And when you're taking a step, make it manageable. Don't take a whole bite and just buy all the animals and everything at once.
Yeah.
Take it.
Might be tempting, but don't do it.
Take it small, take it slow. Start by gathering resources, places that you can gather resources for your homestead, local Craigslists, buy swap sell pages, other homesteaders who realize if you're starting out and getting into it, maybe they have things they're willing to barter, sell, trade, or just give to you who is starting out. I know that we've had several homesteaders who have come to us in the past and have shared items that they have excess of. We have passed on items that we have excess of to starting out homesteaders. There's really tends to be a heart of love and encouragement amongst those who see others trying to take a step and better themselves. And we want to encourage others and help others. So find your resources, your local resources, start small, start gathering your supplies, and then just take a step and just do something. Make it manageable and make your dream a reality.
And again, this kind of ties back to your planning phase. This is why you need to ask that first question, the big picture. What am I trying to do? What is a homestead to me? And then narrowing it down to a small, manageable piece to start with. Once you know that, now you know what you need to buy. Now you know where to put your money or who to ask. You know what resources you're trying to gather.
And this all ties into our Yurtiful life because Yurtiful, simple, sincere, groovy, unconventional, we are trying to pursue something that's different and it takes work and it might be looked at a little differently. But homesteading is a big part of our Yurtiful life and it may not be a big part of your Yurtiful life, and that's okay. But if it is, here are the tips. Here's what we have found helpful. And one last point, really remember that things will go wrong in your homesteading journey. So you really do need to be flexible and remember, never give up. Don't give up on your dream because something went wrong.
No homestead is perfect. No matter how much it might look perfect on the outside, those who are running it, know the errors and mistakes they've had to get through to get it to that point. You're going to have issues too in your journey, and that's okay. That's part of the journey.
It's called learning and it's called life. Things happen and we get up, we move on. And really, this is why, going back to the very first thing we had said in this podcast, was know your why. Have it written down. so that when things go wrong, because they will, you need to remember your why.
And so that why is what gives you the hope. And that's why we're firm foundations of hope, is we're trying to instill in you the importance of holding on to that hope. And one way you can do that is having that why phrase, or that why am I doing this, and writing that down and remembering it through those hard times when you want to give up hope.
Well, it's about time to wrap up this podcast.
So if you would, please like, share, subscribe, and join our email list.
And don't forget, go out,
Dream big,
and discover your own beautiful life.